please give us your name, some contact info, and just check if you are interested in doing some volunteer work. We'd love to get a lot of you over to visit St. Sabina, the faith community of St. Sabina, our distinguished guest speakers church over in Auburn, Gresham. So if we can facilitate that, it would be great. I'll pass one pad around on this side and one pad around on this side. So, as an MLK themed event, we do expect you to get involved. Like that?
I didn't write it, but I would have done it.
Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and start. Again, thank you all for being here at this very special event, and what Dr. King means to me, a discussion with Father Michael L. Pfleger, pastor of the faith community of St. Sabina. I'm Bart Schultz, director of the University of Chicago Civic Knowledge Project, and very honored to have this man here today. As part of this series that we're doing, the MLK Initiative, there are flyers out on all of the seats. Please be sure to grab one and join us for more events coming up. We'll be doing series 2 Saturdays at Rainbow Push, featuring great Reverend Jesse Jackson on a number of occasions. We'll also be having a discussion over at Liberty Baptist Church in Bronzeville on Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolent direct action. As many of you know, this is we're headed towards the 50th anniversary this coming April 4th of Dr. King's tragic assassination. So this is a time for serious reflection on the King legacy and serious action to follow through on that legacy. I think it's safe to say that no one's doing more to carry on Dr. King's legacy than our guest today, Father Pfleger. Father Pfleger is, to invoke King's words, a drum major for justice like no other. As Ms. Bernice King put it, in the spirit and tradition of my father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Father Michael Pfleger has poured his heart and his remarkable energy into fighting for justice and decency and speaking truth to power on behalf of the least of these. Professor Cornel West has called him one of the great prophetic Christian figures in American life and history. Father Pfleger's good works at St. Sabina have been truly transformative. He's the founder of the Employment Resource Center, the ARC Youth Center, St. Sabina Social Service Center, Thea Bowman Spiritual Advance Center, Samaritan House for the Homeless, 80-unit Elders Village, and it goes on. At the request of Ms. Coretta Scott King, Father Pfleger actually was the keynote speaker for the National Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. commemorative service held at Ebenezer Baptist Church on January 20th, 2003. He was also one of those who eulogized Ms. King after her death in 2006. Father Pfleger, as many of you know, has led countless protests. He is always out there. He's a true exemplar of activism. He has protested exploitative advertising, getting young people hooked on tobacco, alcohol. He's been a great, great champion of the fight against guns and gun violence, much more. According to Robert McClory, author of the biography of Father Pfleger, which I encourage you all to take a look at, Radical Disciple, Father Pfleger, St. Sabina Church and the Fight for Social Justice. The first pillar of the theology of St. Sabina's, again, just over here in Auburn, Gresham. It's a great place to do some volunteer work. is social activism. The other pillars are black liberation theology, evangelicalism, and enculturation, a serious effort to blend faith and local culture. But McClory states emphatically that nothing, absolutely nothing, is more important to Pastor Pfleger than social activism. And Pfleger's direct take-no-prisoners dedication to social and political action has its roots in various sources, beginning with Dr. King's life and writings. And that's what we're here to discuss today. Again, Dr. Pfleger, I can't thank you enough for being here, for joining us. It's a terrific honor for all of us here at U Chicago. So at some point we'll ask whether Mr. McClory got you right, but please kick things off with what you would like to say about what Dr. King has meant to you.
Good afternoon. How are you? Thank you for the invite, Bart, and thanks for being here. Let me just start sharing a couple of things. I really want to discuss a question that you had, but a couple of things I want to share about Dr. King. First, kind of a sidebar is that I have a real concern today of two things that are happening with Dr. King. Number one is I think that we're take his book off of the shelf every January 15th. And we talk about him, we share some things about him, there's some memorial services, some breakfasts, some dinners, and then January 17th, put the book back and it's back to business as usual. And that's a really disgrace for me of Dr. King. We trivialize him and say we're honoring him, but all we do is remember him and nothing to continue his legacy. The second thing that's very dangerous to me, I think what's happened, it's just like it's happened with Malcolm X and a number of other figures, is he's been sanitized. We're making him out to be this wonderful, nonviolent peacemaker and forget the radical, prophetic voice that he was to society. Dr. King continued to rattle the foundations of America. Many of you probably already know that he was getting ready to give a sermon on that Sunday before he got killed. He had already written and titled it, Why America May Go to Hell, and went a whole listing of what was America's failures and how she had failed her citizens and particularly failed the poor. And then was getting ready to call for a poor people's campaign, which he was organizing when he got killed in Memphis. So we sanitized him and we've made him safe. And we've made him now acceptable, but never really ready to embrace the strength and the radical voice that he was. To share my own experience with Dr. King, when people say to me today, you know, why are you a minister or why are you a preacher today, I always answer with the remarks, it's because of Dr. King. When I was in high school, I grew up in a very inbred, white, middle-class community over on the southwest side. It was a community that was mostly a lot of police, firemen, city employees. When I was in first year high school, I spent a summer down in Oklahoma, in a Native American reservation, and was exposed to the tremendous killing and murder of not only people, but of a culture of Native Americans. Went back a second summer, and so that had a phenomenal impact on my life. Come junior year of high school, I'm hearing about all this stuff that's going on with this man called Martin Luther King Jr. coming to Chicago. He was going to be marching in Marquette Park, which was about a 15 to 20 minute bike ride from my house. I wanted to see him and hear about it for myself, and not what I was just hearing in my neighborhood. So myself and I persuaded two of my friends to ride our bikes over there because we knew if I asked our parents, they would never let us go. So we rode our bikes over when he was marching there. First thing that happened is we went down Western Avenue from 79th to 71st and went down 71st over to California, Marquette Park. First thing that struck me was that 71st between Tallman and Washtenaw was the Nazi headquarters. I didn't even know that was there. Later on in life, when I asked my parents why, they had never said anything about it. They all said they never wanted me to see it, and so they would always drive another route going that direction, never to pass it. Get to Marquette Park, and we get in it, and one of our friends takes the bikes, and myself and another guy are going over to where Dr. King was coming into the park at 67th and Kedzie. Two things struck me that changed my life really forever. First was, I saw people in the park that I knew. People who were family members of friends that I knew. Some were older brothers and parents of friends of mine. Some went to my church. Some lived in my neighborhood. And I saw this side of them that I had never seen before, of all this hate and of all this anger and violence and turning over cars and starting cars on fire, throwing rocks and bottles, and of course all the racial epithets and all that was going on. We got over to where Dr. King was coming in the park. I didn't even know at that time that he had been hit by a rock already, which took place right when he was entering the park at 67th and Kedzie. I saw him a little further into the park. So first thing I was struck with was the hate. And the second thing I was struck with was him. That amongst all this hate and this racial violence that was going on, Dr. King never, ever, ever responded to it. It was probably the greatest witness of nonviolence that I ever witnessed in my life. Because he looked at people and kept saying, we're brothers and sisters, we have to learn to live together, and never responded to all this hate, throwing things at him, yelling things at him as he walked along. So I went home that day, and on bikes riding back home. I just finished junior year in high school. It was April 5th, 1966. And I said to myself, there's something about this man that is, I got to know, either he's crazy or there's some kind of power that I wanted to learn about this man. So I went back and began to read everything he had ever written up to 1966, tried to learn everything about him, and see what I could find out about this guy. And the more I studied him, the more I realized that his strength was his faith. And he saw himself first as a minister, not as an activist. Dr. King would often say, and often write in places that he went to, that we can and we must make laws that make lynching illegal, that make segregation illegal, that make discrimination illegal. He said we must do that. But Dr. King said we can never make a law that'll change the heart. And the only thing that'll change the heart is when we deal with them with faith. And that's why he said he was first and foremost a minister, because he didn't want to just change the laws, he wanted to change people. And that's what he spent his life trying to do. My intentions were, at that time I was at Loyola University. I was going to finish up university and 68, go there, get an education, and go work full-time with the movement. Then, of course, Dr. King gets killed on April 4th, 1968, and my whole life turns upside down because I don't know what I'm going to do now. This is what I wanted to do. And I decided I'm going to go on into ministry and try to build, if I ever got an opportunity, a church that reflected what he said church ought to be. And I'll say there's one last thing and then I'll open it up, is that Dr. King, I think, although there was tremendous challenge to the Bull Connors and the systems and the racism in the country, but Dr. King had almost a divine unsettledness in him to see what he really wanted to change with the church. I think one of his strongest letters, and one of the things he was most proud of, was his letter from the Birmingham jail to the faith communities in Birmingham, when they were telling him to get out of Birmingham and he shouldn't have been there and he's an outsider, agitator, and all the rest. And he gave this very confrontive letter to the faith communities of where were they and what were they doing. Kind of like their silence to the evil was worse than what evil was being done. Dr. King always felt that, particularly he felt from the Muslim and to the Jewish faith, but he certainly to the Christian faith that he was in, always felt that the prophetic voice ought to come from the church. That the church ought to be, the faith communities ought to be the ones who stand, if you will, on the outskirts and throw the rock at the window or shout at the window and scream to those in power and challenge them to do the right thing. We were never supposed to be part of the system. We were supposed to be the ones that challenged the system. What happened, and if you realize in Dr. King's movement, he always met in church. He always had scripture, always had singing, and that's where the marching orders would come out of the sanctuaries of churches. The tragedy of this is we look from 68 to now 2018, that the church, and I believe synagogues and mosques too, many of them, but the church has now become a Corporation 500 company. It's become another business. It's become part of the system. It's one of the pharaohs of society today. And the church has forgotten who it is she represents and what her purpose and voices ought to be. So I think that Dr. King would be extremely disappointed in what's happened in church over the years and what the institution we call church is. Another great mentor of mine was a guy named Dr. Gardner Taylor, a great theologian and writer. And Dr. Gardner Taylor said to me one day, he said, I don't care what people are out here doing in these churches. Just stop doing it in the name of Jesus, because it ain't Jesus. And I think that was what brought me into ministry, and that's what we try to do at St. Sabina, is build a church where we understood justice is not some attachment, some committee, some group in the church, but justice is the DNA of faith. And if we are not doing the faith and the works together, we may be having a nice social club, but we're certainly not doing the gospel. So I stop there and open up to Bart or anybody who has questions, and we'll go.
Let's have a quick initial round of applause. Is it okay if we sit and talk? Can you hear and see okay?
I almost stand back up. I'm fine.
But I know there's going to be plenty of questions from the audience, but I can't resist squeezing just one right off. So did you ever find yourself, in some kind of state of tension theologically between your Catholic beliefs and the Baptist
Always.
Of Dr. King?
Always. I mean, for many years, people would always ask, are you staying in the Catholic Church? And many times I thought to leave, I wanted to leave, was going to leave, and but every time I really prayed about it, I never felt that release. I would get letters from other priests telling me to leave the Catholic Church, just telling me that I was embarrassing them. But my thing has been this. First of all, there is no denomination that I don't have problems with. None. Because I think every denomination and faith community, Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim, as has been touched by man and woman, has been perverted. Because human hands pervert and create institutions rather than just movements of the spirit. And that's life. That's just how it is. So there's no denomination that I do not have problems with. So what I have tried to do in the Catholic Church, at least, has been to be very vocal about the things I disagree with, fight for the things I do believe in, and try to show that there is another way you can do church than what had become the norm. That has certainly cost me. I was thrown out of the seminary 3 times. And somehow God ordained. I've been the only priest in the Archdiocese of Chicago that has been suspended twice by the former Cardinal George. And for 10 years he tried to remove me from my church. And finally, when he couldn't find anybody, he told me to find somebody. So that wasn't going to happen. So I've tried to be in it and be a voice of conscience to it, and at least try to call it to be, more honest to the gospel. I mean, we go back to, whether in the Christian community, if you go back to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we go to the early church. Let's remember that every disciple of Jesus, with the exception of John, who died a natural death on the island of Patmos, and Judas, who took his own life, every other disciple was killed, was murdered for his preaching and teaching of the good news. Take that and, move it up a couple thousand years, and now, we have priests and we have ministers who are doing the invocations for Pharaoh, and not the voices to say, let my people go. So, I was one of those people, I think, that Dr. King put in me enough to say that there are those to fight from outside the institutions, and there are those who must try to fight from the inside and hold on to their integrity. I've tried to fight it from the inside and hold on to my integrity, and sometimes kept it, sometimes lost it, but I've tried to do my best to hold on to it.
I'll have plenty of opportunities. Go ahead.
Okay. I went down to the Selma March from here. I was at the Unitarian Church, and I was young in those days, so I wasn't part of the oligarchy that went down. And KAM Israel took 60 people down. I was too young to go with that group. Anyway, I went down and went through the march. It was rainy. And actually, they split the people there. A lot of people don't know this. There was 300 of the young people that they left to go ahead, and the older people went back. And then they were all going to meet at the end with the with people in the industry, actors and stuff like that, that were brought up in their limos at the last minute. And I met Monsignor Egan in that.
Jack Egan, right?
And Peggy. And they changed my life. And Cody hated him.
Yeah. Jack used to always call me and say to me, I'm trying to figure out who he hates more, you or me. And I said, well, if he hates you more, he'll get more attention looking at you and leave me alone for a minute. And Jack was a great guy. In fact, you might remember when Jack Egan died, the day of his funeral.
I was the last week at Northwestern Hospital for the last week of his life.
Well, before, he wrote a great letter, of course, to that last week of his life, but the day that he died, for the day of his funeral, rather than be present for his funeral, Cardinal George got on a plane and went to Rome to miss his funeral. Let me just bring up Jack Egan, because Jack Egan, Rabbi Heschel, Jack Egan, there was a number of whole group of folks that were,
The president of Notre Dame met
Esper.
Egan in the airport. And he said, Monsignor, well, he wasn't Monsignor, I don't think at that time, why are you so down? And Cody had given him this little church, no money, just to get him out. And he says, I don't know what to do. And,
he invited him to Notre Dame. Became assistant to the president, right. One of the things that were remarkable about Dr. King that I think we've lost today is Dr. King was a firm believer of inclusion. He had made a comment which to Harry Belafonte and to Andy Young and to Ralph Abernathy and to his inner core that we are never going to win this battle until other people care about our battle. And we got to bring in everybody, even when there was a point where Belafonte and Andy Young in particular, when the Kennedys were president, and they said, Kennedys are never going to be on our side, that Bobby Kennedy hates us, Bobby Kennedy's not going to, they were saying all this stuff, and they said, we've got to just, not work with the Kennedys. And Dr. King said, find their moral center and bring them to us. We don't cut people off. We find their center and bring them in. And if they won't come in, then they chose not to come in, but we never locked them from coming in. So if you looked at those, whether it was in Birmingham, whether it was in Selma, whether it was in Montgomery, Dr. King always had this thing of having, Harry Belafonte was the main one who brought in the entertainers group. There was Jewish, Muslim, Catholics, Baptists, Church of God in Christ. There were priests and nuns. When you look at those old pictures, when they talk about, well, I shouldn't be out here marching, I should be out here demonstrating. Well, let's go back to the 60s and look at all the priests and nuns who were demonstrating part of the civil rights movement. A good friend of mine, Father Dick Morris, who was no longer a priest, but was shot down in Selma when he was marching. But Dr. King believed in everybody coming in, and Dr. King also believed, which we've lost today, is that the bigger the circle, the better. For instance, one of the things we don't do today, there was a goal, there was a target. And the target was very clearly defined: desegregation, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. There was this thing of what, these are the things we're going to achieve. Now, you had Stokely Carmichael, you had the Black Panthers, you had Elijah Muhammad, you had Malcolm, you had all these different groups who respected each other. They had some rough edges a few times during it, but then they all learned how to respect each other. And said, Dr. King used to say, if we're trying to go downtown, there's not just one way to get there. So everybody take whatever lane you want, as long as we know this is where we're trying to get to. And so you could have that, I mean, what people don't realize is right before King and, of course, Malcolm got killed, they had decided to how they can support and work and walk together. In fact, I had Atala Shabazz, Dr. Malcolm X's, at my house with Betty Shabazz, his wife, Mrs. King, and Yolanda King years ago, talking about how they could try to bring the movement further, uniting these different groupings. There was always a desire for him to say, we don't have to be on the same street. We just have to be going to the same place. And everybody go down the way they want to get there. We can disagree, but we are not going to condemn each other so the enemy can divide us. And that was a gift of his that I think we lack today. We really lack that ability today. Yes, sir?
Sir, you mentioned that just before he was assassinated, Dr. King wrote up a list of the evils of America. And that's 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. What do you think he would add to that list today, and what would you put on that list?
I would probably keep the same list. What he talked about was militarism, he talked about poverty, and he talked about racism. I think when you go to any of the big issues we have today in society, they all come down to those. You know, there's not one problem we see going on in society, whether it's education, whether it's unemployment, whether it's incarceration. We look at all these issues, you can all go down to racism. You know, it always has its roots in the same place. It has different ways it'll blossom out in society. But I think that he was a genius and able to look beyond all the distractions to let's deal with the core of these things, and cause us to eradicate the core. I think that one of the reasons I believe that Dr. King was killed was because, all right, you can go with all these other voting and desegregation and all the rest, but now you're calling for the poor people's campaign. Now you want to deal with economics in America, you got to die. Because now you're trying to change the system that built itself on the backs of poor people and still does today. So I think the core can't be the same. The only thing I think that he would have articulated more, I know was going to articulate more, but didn't, was and coming out with that Birmingham jail speech. He wanted to confront more the faith communities, and I would confront those today because I think, you know, when Dr. King. In the civil rights movement, initially, there was this great support for him in the faith amongst the members in churches. So pastors Let's be real. They got on board because their members were on board. And then they were seen supporting him. Then, after he came out on April 4th, 1967, in Riverside Church against the Vietnam War, people ran from him. And when they ran from him, churches felt that they could run away from him. Because now pastors felt, well, my members aren't comfortable with this, so let's not use this as a type to pull people from him. And they did. Let me just draw a connection. We fast forward real quick. When Dr. King came out against the Vietnam War, and says, now you're messing with the government, you're messing with white people's agendas, you know, you're causing problems now, and you're going to lose support. The faith community backed off of him. Fast forward it to 2008, Jeremiah Wright. Jeremiah Wright, who's my pastor, when he was coming, when Barack was running for president, and he disowned Wright and then disowned me because of things we were saying, because I stood up with Jeremiah Wright, and made a big mistake, which I said to him then, when you do this, how you start is how you're going to end. And you saw the Hannitys and the Bill O'Reillys and the right wing decide they were going to destroy Jeremiah Wright, and then later, after the speech I gave at Trinity, decided they were going to destroy me. That's when my first suspension came about. And I kept telling preachers and pastors of all denominations then, do you understand what's happening here? If you don't stand with Jeremiah Wright, or 67, you don't stand with Dr. King, they're going to send a message. This is what happens to you if you speak against government or the status quo. And when all the preachers backed away, which still to this day is one of Jeremiah Wright's most painful things, of all the abandonment, when that happened, they sent the message, shut up or this is going to happen to you. And then all of a sudden, the church became silent. The prophetic voice got laryngitis. And the evangelical right now has Trump being the messenger from God. He's definitely a messenger. I just think they got the wrong direction. Yeah. Well, he just give you all this first. Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi, Father Pfleger. Thank you for coming today.
Sure.
Sharing your stories. I work at UIC and I work in a fellowship program for undergraduate students of color. And a lot of what I find through my work there, and I also do some like youth development work in the city, Inglewood, back of the arts. I kind of have this like theory, or this something that really pains me. Is like we talk about inclusion in Chicago. We know that about this the uber segregation, hyper segregation. We know about Rom, and we know about like the Mayor 1% and how everything that works kind of like politics in Chicago. What I would like to ask you is, like, Amazon is coming, Google is here. We talk about jobs. We talk about all of these. Like, we want these big businesses to come here, but in the aspect of the youth in Chicago, who some of them might not want to go to UIC, some of them might not want to go to the city colleges. I feel like the corporate entities in Chicago do not do enough for the communities that are kind of like left out of the conversation. And I know Dr. King talked a lot about jobs, and I just wonder what your opinion would be about, is there enough being done in the corporate world, especially in Chicago, for people who need those jobs more than...
Not only that they do not do enough, they don't give a damn. And the problem is that we have politicians who do not make them give a damn. You know, they asked me to be a part of the Amazon committee to help try to bring Amazon here. So I said I would only be a part of it if I could see the whole plan being offered them. If I could see exactly what they were going to offer Amazon to come in, I would say, well, we can't share all that. I said, I'm not going to be a part of it. Because I want to know, because you're going to promise them the damn city, but you're not going to make any expectation. I've been saying since before Ron was mayor, and I've been saying since Ron was mayor, you look at the city of Chicago, there's 77 neighborhoods. There's 10 to 12 neighborhoods where more violence takes place. But look at those neighborhoods. We all talk about condemning violence in Chicago. Well, everybody likes the story on TV about the violence and the numbers and all that other bull that they give you. Nobody goes deeper. Look at those 10 to 12 communities and find the same exact thread. Double-digit unemployment, failing and underperforming schools and underfunded schools, most coming back with incarceration, from incarceration. When you come out of prison, you get $10, $20 in a bus card until you make it. Most foreclosure and boarded up housing, lack of economic development, proliferation of guns, abandoned lots, and mental health, lack of any mental health resources, and highest in poverty.
Don't forget food deserts.
But what?
Food deserts.
Oh yeah, that food deserts. But nobody deals with that crap. I say all the time, you put two lions in a cage and don't feed them. One's going to do what? Eat the other. Survive. You cage in whole communities with no resources. What's going to happen? The communities are going to turn on each other. And I gave a talk at the Union Club a couple of weeks ago. And somebody asked me the question. Every time I go talk in wealthy white communities now, it's always the same question comes up immediately. Well, now, all this is happening in our neighborhood. It's on the North Riverside, and it's on Lakeview, and it's on Ravenswood. What are we going to do to stop it? And I said, I am so happy. I said, I would take busloads of people and bring them to your neighborhood. Because there ain't shit left to rob on the south side. Really isn't. I'm not going to go rob somebody in Lower Wacker. They ain't got nothing. So there's nothing left here. How long did you think it was before people say, wait, rob White Hand on 79th Street or rob White Hand on State Parkway? Who's probably got more money? It's just common sense. I keep telling people, violence has keys. It's going to grow. Nobody gave a damn about drugs until it got into the homes of wealthy people. And senators and congressmen and elected officials and their sons and daughters had a drug problem. Then we had a war on drugs. So we haven't cared about this. And the real thing that grabs at me so, we don't care about the violence now. We want it contained. And I said to them, and I say every place I go, I can't wait for the day when something happens and no longer anybody says that quote you see on the 6 o'clock news, this usually doesn't happen in our neighborhood. We're going to get to a point that, and you know what, as I tell folks all the time, are you going to wait till it gets to your son or your daughter or your house to do something about it? Or are you going to do something now because it's wrong? I will never forget marching after Newtown with a group downtown Chicago after the Newtown massacre of those babies. And a mother, North Shore, nice lady, was marching alongside me, and I said, ma'am, can you just explain something to me? Why now? We've been fighting and running this violence and all this stuff going on for years, and now she said to me, in all her innocence, you know, and we mean that, she looked at me and she said, Father Mike, she said, when I saw those babies in Newtown killed, their faces, all I could think of was my son or my daughter. She said, but when I see faces of people on the west or the south side, I can't identify with them. And that's the problem. We don't see what's going on the south or the west side as our family. And until you connect with that, it's over there, it's something else, it's some alien neighborhood I don't care about. Just keep it there and don't bring it to me. And that's the mentality. You know, so, you know, when I adopted my first son, I've adopted 3 African American sons. When I adopted my first son, I'll never forget a cousin meeting me in the store and running into me. He said, oh, hey, Mike, glad to hear you adopted. You know, it's a great thing. It's really cool, man, but why, And that's the mentality. And so until we get that king mentality of the beloved community, that we're all connected, that we're sisters and brothers, that what happens to you affects me, what happens to you affects me. Until we get to that mentality, we're going to still marginalizing people and and being disconnected from people, and particularly in a day we live in America now, which is so selfish and so self-centered, you know, that we're all about self. What's in it for me? And see, that's totally confronting to who Dr. King was. Dr. King was never a, how does this affect me? Remember when he gave his sermon on the Good Samaritan? And he talks about the Good Samaritan, for those who may not know it. The guy gets beat up, left to the side of the road to die. So the priest walks by, sees him, goes to the other side, goes on to the temple. A Levite, government person, walks by, sees it, and goes on about his business. Then a Samaritan comes by, a foreigner, sees the person, goes to the side of the road, picks him up, puts ointment on his wounds, brings him to the innkeeper, and says, do whatever you have to do in order to make him well again. So Dr. King said, I understand the Samaritan. I understand the priest and Levite. They said, oh, what's your name? Michelle. If Michelle's on the side of the road, if I go stop to help her, number one, it's going to cost me time and I got something to do. Number two, it might cost me some money and I got to hold on to my money. Number three, what if Michelle doesn't appreciate me stopping to help her? Number four, maybe the people that beat her up are still there and they could beat me up. So I just got to keep on my way and ignore it. Dr. King said that most people ask the question, if I do that, what's it going to cost me? But Dr. King said the Christian asked the question, what if I don't do that? What happens to Michelle? And that's the mentality we have to live by. If I don't do something about the violence, what happens to the next child killed on the south side or the west side? Because we have to understand, these are our sisters and brothers. We have to understand that this is my city, this is my country, these are American citizens. It's amazing to me. There's a show on Sunday mornings called This Week with George Stephanopoulos. You may have seen it on ABC. Every week of that show, they will list at the end of the show, they'll say, now we want to remember any of our military that lost their life this week. And they just scroll down names of military lost their life. They don't say if they're black, white, rich, poor, gay, straight, Christian, Muslim, Jew. They're military. And we care about it. How come we can't think like that as people? That if something happens, that's it. It's my brother, that's my sister. And we are concerned about it because a life was lost. And that's why you see the police and the media will say, oh, what's your name, sir?
Michael.
Michael, great name. So if Michael was an African-American brother and Michael gets killed, the first thing they put out was gang-related. Why did they do that? So now I feel less bad about Michael's death because, well, he was in a gang. He knew what he was getting into. So we dehumanize people by labeling them and demonizing them, and then we don't have to care about it. This one's number two.
Thank you, Father Pfleger, for your tireless activism. I was fascinated by the featuring of the story on 60 Minutes at the beginning of this year, saying that you put a $5 bounty on each head of gun murderers in the South Side, and you had by then 12 killers out. So the number itself is amazing, but it also exposes and accentuates where the institution has failed in a very dramatic way. So my question is there a need, or is it possible to go and spur action on the parts of institutions without making people in charge too embarrassed to act on good faith? If yes, when and where? Or what can we
In
learn?
terms of people who are shot or killed, you mean? Or what?
How is there a need, or is it possible to make institutions work without embarrassing those people in charge? And what?
I'd like to say that it is, but we live in a day when it doesn't really work. You know, Dr. King had 5 steps of social change. The first step was always education. Education alone should help us do the right thing. But education doesn't mean you do the right thing. Just for those who are here at the University of Chicago, going to a wonderful school, but just because you get a degree from the University of Chicago doesn't mean you can do the right stuff. Really. Education is first. Then it was always negotiation. How do we take the information out and try to share this and try to work to do the right thing together? Then if that didn't work, you went to step 3, self-purification. Let me look in myself and see, do I have the right motives? Do I have the right heart on this? Am I doing it for the right reason? So first, then look in self, Dr. King said. Then 4th was demonstration. And, you know, the by any means necessary, but of course for him was never violent. So it was the demonstration. And then after demonstration, his 5th one was always reconciliation. Because he said you never really truly win until your enemy becomes your ally. But you try education, you try negotiation, you always look at your heart. But then sometimes demonstration or calling people out or embarrassing people is the only thing that works. You know, unfortunately, we're a very smart society. We know what the problems are. We just don't care. I look at the South and West Side neighborhoods and look at the neglect that makes many of our neighborhoods look like third world countries. Say, well, how does the city do this? Well, you did it on the West Side. Remember Cabrini Green. Look at what happened. I used to run a soup line in 1974 on Madison Avenue. I can't afford restaurants on Madison Avenue now. South Loop. One good thing about being old, before you get crazy, and you remember things. I used to go down to what was called Maxwell Street. I used to go down there and buy stuff and barter stuff in stores and buy those nasty Polish and eat them every week. You know, now, that's just now South Loop where there's 2 and 3 and 4 and $5 million homes. We change the neighborhoods we want to change. We just decide where we will and where we won't. Look at what happened in Bronzeville. Anybody here live in Bronzeville? Bronzeville's being gentrified. I was about maybe 2 months ago, I'm driving some kids home about 10:30 one night. I'm driving in Bronzeville, and there was 2 young white ladies, maybe about 21, 22, walking the dog down around at 10:30 at night. I'm saying, what the hell is this? So I pulled over, and I said, please, don't be afraid, man. Father said, oh, hey, Father Michael, I know you. I said, I got to ask you something. Do you live here? She said, oh, yeah, that's my house right there. And I was just like amazed, like there's this gentrification taking place. Bronzeville, which was like the black metropolis. And nothing against it, but I'm saying when you're pushing people out, and people no longer afford in the place that they used to live, that's a problem. So, you know, unfortunately, the short answer to your question, I gave you a long answer. I would love to think that just pointing out what needs to be done would do it. But oftentimes, until you fight, scream, yell, kick, boycott, you know, do protests, people ignore you. But that's also why I tell people who are doing protesting all the time. I just had a meeting of 30 activists at our place last week. I said, protest is important. I'm a believer. I'll be out there and fight you at every protest. But there has to be a plan after the protest. Just being mad and yelling and screaming and marching is great. They will just wait you out. The system, okay, let them have their little thing, let them do their voice, okay. Now you finish? Okay, now business as usual. You got to dismantle the system. I had a person, old person, that's you and then you, okay?
Yeah, you talked about Dr. King wanting to change the church. And when he was alive, there was a movement to get him elected president of the Baptist Convention. And they had a convention down there. And it got so contentious that a guy was actually killed. Okay? So that's just how much opposition there was in the black church toward Dr. King's program. The second thing is in terms of Dr. King was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So it was amazing to me that people were shocked when he came out opposed to the war in Vietnam. I mean, they didn't give him the Nobel Peace Prize.
Because he was a warmonger, right?
Okay, and so, I mean, and the speech you almost never hear is the speech he made at Riverside Church.
Right.
Where he says, the United States government was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world.
Right.
In 1968.
Mhm.
What is it today?
The same.
He died
And-
1 year after.
Right, the dear to the date. But also remember, they gave that same Nobel Peace Prize to Barack Obama, who was the greatest increaser of drones and the killing by drones than any president. So, and I'm not a Barack hater. I'm very clear. Love the man personally. But I believe that anybody in position is to be challenged. My job is not to, hitch my wagon to a candidate. My job is to hitch my wagon to policy and fight policy to that candidate, whoever they are. So, yeah, it's a reality, though, of what's happened to the Nobel Peace Prize. Here and then here. Yes.
Thanks, Father Mike, for having a high school class there. It's kind of motivating for us. Hopefully they hear Dr. King's message and are some way motivated too. Question was about the plan. What do you think, Dr. King? It's not such an easy solution. How do we create jobs on the west side, the economic issues of, some of the people of color? What do you think, Dr. King's thoughts? You said call it the corporations. They don't care, like you said, they'll wait you out. What would a good plan do you think you would have been thinking of how to improve the plight?
Well, I think the plan has to, it's not deep. Take, for instance, we've had Boeing, we've had, now we're talking about Google expanding, we have Apple, we have all these major companies coming in. We give them huge tax write-offs, huge land write-offs. Why are we not telling all these major corporations coming in, okay, here's what we're going to give you in taxes, here's what we're going to give you in land, here's what we're going to give you in subsidy, but here's what you're also going to give us. Here is our 10 most unemployed neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. We need you to hire at least 1/3 of your hiring from these communities, so we can equalize this playing field. We're never going to equalize it. What Frederick Douglass said, it's not going to happen because people want to do right. They have to be forced to do right. So why is that part of the plan? And that's why I know with Amazon, that was not part of the plan. Because I'm not calling the mayor's office. I want to know, is in this proposal, are you also demanding a certain amount of jobs that are going to come in to neighborhoods like this? And the south, and not this. To the south and west side where there's high unemployment. Well, Father Pfleger, you're always trying to push too far. What we got to do is bring them in, and then when they're here, we'll ask them that. Hell no. I'm here now. They can go to hell. You don't give me nothing. I'm here. You see my building? So if we don't make that kind of proposal coming in, and it's not just major corporations. I said to, back when we were having, everybody excited about the NFL drafts. We did in Chicago. While NFL drafts was going down in Grant Park, we had the most dangerous weekend of shooting on the south and the west side of Chicago. But all we talked about, isn't this great what's going on downtown? Really?
All the police.
And we forget about all that's going on in the communities. So, I'm saying is there's got to be demands we put on people. I asked the mayor here, for the last year and a half, we started a program called Strong Futures a year ago, August. And what we did is we said, because I'm really trying to, the city says there's 58,000 unemployed, not in school, not in work, between the ages of 18 and 28. 58,000. We believe it's more about 75,000, but the city says 58, okay. County says it's 90,000. So I said, okay, give me some money to go after this group as a pilot to show you we can turn lives around. Well, they're going to give us 300,000, then it went down to 250,000. Okay, give me what you gave me, I'll raise the rest. We took 50 guys with felonies, some had ankle bracelets on, some are on parole, all of them had some kind of criminal background. Not in work, not in school. About 30, 35 of them were shooters on the street. Some of these guys had killed people. Some of these guys had shot people. We took their resumes of the 50 guys, we sent it to University of Chicago Crime Lab, sent it to a friend of mine who runs the sociology department out of Fordham University, said, give us scenarios or projections for these guys. They came back with almost the same thing. Probably somewhere between 42 to 44, 46 of them are going to end up either incarcerated or shot in the next 3 to 5 years. Great, this is the group I wanted. We took those 50. Guess what? By September 2017, 46 of the 50 are in full-time jobs. The others are in part-time jobs, and now we've gone up to 75, and we're going up to 100 by the end of March. So I go back to the city, and I say, man, they tell, oh, we've run these out, this is the highest success rate of a program of this age group anywhere in the country. Wow, great. So you ought to be wanting to pour millions of dollars into this and expanding it all over the place. Well, you know, we'd like to, but it's hard to get money and resources. You see the cities grow, the states grow, the government grow. Okay. What I wanted to prove is you raised probably 25 to 30 million dollars in 4 months for BAM. Nothing against BAM. Giving mentors to young brothers and sisters in schools, high school, great, good thing. But what are you doing to this other 58, 75,000 on the street who are not in school and not in work, who are usually your number one perpetrator and your number one victim? What are you doing for them? It's both and, it's not either or. So if you could raise 25 million for one program, and you got this little pittance for the other program, and then I said to my, I went down to the city, I said, I make this come from a business sense. We spend approximately $6,500 per person, and our staff is working with them and the rest. $6,500 per person. If one of them go to jail, it's $44,000 to $45,000 a year to keep. If they get shot, got to go to county hospital, it's $125,000 or more in all the services and care and the rest. So from a business decision, what we're doing is saving the city and the county and the state money. Doesn't that make sense to you? It sure does. I wish we had the money. That's bullshit. I mean, why would you not tell one of these companies coming in, hey, this is a program we see working. We want to open up 5 sites in the city. We need you to put $1 million in it. $1 million for Amazon, Google, Boeing is petty cash. They give that, they're giving more than that to campaigns. So, I'm sorry, back here.
Thank you so much for your witness. I was thinking about something you said before about single case commitment to inclusion at the same time.
About what? I'm sorry.
Inclusion, commitment to inclusion, trying to work together with others to just get the same.
Right.
My question is about discernment, some thoughts about how to identify the enemy and how to see who are the partners trying to work together towards that direction. Some thoughts about how to
I don't think that's difficult, because I think, I always, I'm one of these people, and I know you're students and you do research and all that, and that's great, and I love you for it. But when we look at the problems like with violence, we don't need another task force. We don't need another study. We all know it. Let's just do something with what we know. Just like the Kern report years ago talked about problems in justice in the city. We have all these reports, but there's no follow-up after the reports. We got all this information, so we are smart, stupid people. So my thing is that if we could first of all ever come together, and which is the reason we had this thing with the activists last week, said, okay, we disagree, we got Black Lives Matter, YPP 100, we got brothers from the street, and all, we got all those different, let's just come together and say, what are some things we can commonly look at, going forward. I don't think the problem is, looking at unemployment, looking at education, we know how to do good schools. We have Whitney Young, we have Jones Commercial, we know how to do good schools. We just decide where we're gonna do them. So how are we going to say these are some demands that we're all gonna agree on? Now, we can fight our other stuff too, that's cool. But these are some things we're all gonna go after. We're gonna demand. You know, we're looking what's happening in Englewood right now with the Board of Ed. Gonna close down 4 schools and say we're gonna build a new one. The new one might be great, have one of the service and all the rest, but we're closing 4 schools and the new one won't open up for over a year later. Whoa, well, so what happens when they close down and then there's a new school, and what about turfs, and what about territories, and what happens for the whole year while they're waiting to go to a new school? Has anybody thought about that? Did anybody consult with the people in the neighborhood? You came in and we know what's best for you. Well, those days are over. So I don't think it's a problem finding the targets. I think our problem is we're too into our own thing, and we're not coming together. And I think the enemy of injustice wants us to stay divided. And that's why they try to buy off this one, send a grant to this one, send something over to this one, try to buy people off. So, you know, you stay happy, and then you're one of our friends. So we keep people from really coming together and fighting. And one of the things I loved about Dr. King was he was free. One of the things I love about Louis Farrakhan, a real close friend of mine, was free. And I like to feel that I'm free. I don't have a damn thing, I have no savings account. Not a cent. I could be on whacker tomorrow if I get fired, and I don't want that to happen. But I'm free. You know, and I think there's nothing better than freedom. Say what you believe, and not have to ask somebody if it's okay. I remember when I was suspended the second time, one of the great universities, I won't say the name of this city, I went and applied for it. Because I thought, they're going to put me out this time. I need a job. I like to eat. I like to drive a car. I like to have bed at night. Just basic thing. So I went and applied. And I went to the South. The vice president said, yes, the president said, we like you. We'd like to offer you a job here. Now we just got to run it through our board. If anybody knows about universities, the board runs the universities. They came back and said, we'd like to offer you the job, but our board said we'd like you to not talk so much about the NRA, the gun industry, because that could bring a lot of heat on the school, and you'd have to stop talking about that. And I said, thank you very much, I'm going. You know, but it's about control. But, yes?
One of the really great things he says about letter from Birmingham is that you have to use direct, when you get to the point of direct action, you need to use it to create a crisis where they have to negotiate with you. So I guess I have 2 questions. You know, how can we do this? It feels like we need a mass movement again, and we're also fragmented. You know, you go to like the immigrant rights rallies, and it's just immigrants, and you go to the Palestinian, and it's just the Palestinians, and we have the women's march, and it's a march, but it isn't really resistance. So, I mean, how do we create this mass movement, and how do we create this crisis where they have to negotiate?
Well, I think we have to be committed to really change, you know, government and not Band-Aid it. But I think, you know, that's big up here. Let's start down. An example right here, University of Chicago. When University of Chicago was fighting to be a part of the Barack Obama Library, students here and other adults in the city said, you're not going to build a library for Barack Obama until you agree to build a trauma center. They said no. Your president here said no, and other folks in here said no. And I'll never forget meeting with one of your, I don't know what her post is here now, Susan Scher. What's her post here in U of C? I don't know, she was here and then she went to go with Michelle at the White House, and then she came back to U of C. So Susan Scher and I met, and I said, let me just be very clear. I said, it's only talking to me and the people that I represent, we will stop the library. I will sit on the construction site. I will block the tractor. And I said, unless you're going to kill me, I'll be out there every day unless you agree to a library. I mean, we agree to a trauma center. And the students here were putting all sorts of pressure on the university. So what happened? The university that said, absolutely not. We're getting ready to open a trauma center in May. Yes. So, the reason I say that is, they were forced. And when they gave me that call from the president's office, and we want you to know we have agreed, we're going to open a trauma center, and the rest, I said, wonderful, I'm glad you did the right thing. And the guy who they got to run this trauma center, an African-American brother who was wonderful. So you force people to do things. When we were fighting years ago on billboards, now let's take another. Let's take stores on 79th Street who were selling alcohol to minors, bad food, outdated stuff, the whole 9 yards. So I call the city of Chicago. And I say, hey, I need you to send inspectors out to these 60 stores on 79th Street, Racine, Ashland, and Halsted, and inspect them because this is really bad what's going on there. And Karen Schoenberger was Commissioner time. She said, Father Mike, I'd really love to do that, but we only have 12 inspectors in the whole city, and so we do the worst of things. We go out every day, but we can't ever do that. Okay. Will you train 120 of my members to be inspectors? So I don't know if I could do that. And we checked hers up, and they said, well, yeah, we can give you the training, give you the information, but we can't make you inspectors. Fine, all I need is a training. She sent her folks out. They trained 120 of my members. Then I put in teams of 2. And I assigned them to all 60 stores. 2 were to every store. They had to agree that every week they were going to go to that store at different times and inspect the store. We had the inspection sheets the city used. So of course now they can't make them inspectors. So we got to make them inspectors. We gave them badges. We look better than any of the city inspectors. And we simply walked in the store and said, sir, I'm Mike Pfleger, I'm an inspector in the Auburn Russian community. And I need to see, first of all, your cooler. And I need to see what degrees it's at. I see lunch meat there that's sold separately. That's breaking the law right there. We write that up. I see some rat droppings over here. We write that up. Why are those cords on the floor? All of a sudden, and then they would turn papers into us. We would send to the city. Well, the city that summer collected over $300,000 of fines. Now the city liked the program. Plus, we closed down 12 stores because they were so bad that they had to shut them down. So I just use that example because there's things we can do, to bring about change. And once you empower somebody, the thing I learned about the members from my church, once you got trained to be an inspector, guess what? Every place you went, you were inspected. So they were downtown, they were calling me on the mic, and get down here right now, get an inspector in, I'm in the store of Michigan Avenue, and this and that. And, I would get calls from the store saying, would you get your damn parishioners out of my store, coming in here, because every place they went now, they were an inspector. Once you empower people, once people see we can make a difference, you unleash them to be agents of change. We just think we can't change things. That's what folks done in South Africa. And then apartheid ended. And then Nelson Mandela went from being a prisoner to a president. We can change anything we want. We just got to have the will for it, and we've got to have the determination. Nothing happens quick. And we are in this microwave age. And I say this, I know there's young people in the room, but we're in this microwave age, so you text somebody, and they don't text you back in a certain amount of time. Did you get my text? Really? You're not that important right now. We're doing something. We're this microwave, everything happened real quick. Dr. King, what was the last talk he gave? I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there, but we as a people are going to get there. Exactly. That's what it has to be. Let me tell you something. I know we got time, right? You tell me when we're finished. Okay. I'm going to get to 10 o'clock tonight. I'll wake up in the room with me talking to myself. But the thing of it is, we are in this very, not only selfish age, So we always got to say, what's in it for me? We understand real leadership. What Dr. King taught us was that real leadership is understanding. I do what I do. So we're at the time. I'm going to run the race as long as I can. Then you run the race. And then you pass on to another generation. We keep passing the baton on. I don't expect to see violence ended in my life. But I believe I got to do what I'm here while I'm here, so that some child in my neighborhood 10 years from now is not going to walk to school afraid. They're not going to sit on the porch worrying if he or she's going to get killed. It's going to happen, but only if everybody running the marathon race do their part and pass the baton on. But we're so selfish, well, you know, how am I going to get out of it? Nothing. Except living your life with something other than yourself. So I plant a tree that somebody else sits under, that somebody else eats the fruit from. That's all it's about. It's not about you, it's not about me. It's about what's right. I will never forget sitting with somebody from the Montgomery Improvement Association. Anybody know what the Montgomery Improvement Association is? Any young people? Montgomery Improvement Association. Anybody know what it was? Oh my God. Go back to your principles and tell them they should be ashamed of themselves. All right, Dr. King comes to Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He's the pastor of the church. Rosa Parks gets arrested on the bus. The meeting of pastors happens in the basement of Dexter Avenue Church. They called for a boycott. They asked Martin King to be head of it. Now remember, Martin King was made pastor of the church after they fired Vernon John, but they said he was too outspoken. Martin King comes in. He now is pastor of the church. They ask him to take over the church, take over this leadership, and they form an organization called the Montgomery Improvement Association. They call for a boycott of the buses in Montgomery. That went on for 381 days, I think 381. 381 days, I'm almost sure. And they do that until the Montgomery bus system breaks down and integrates their buses. Now, I'm giving a talk for the anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott maybe 15 years ago. And I'm down in Montgomery and I'm giving this talk, and I asked, well, are some of the real organizers and members of the Improvement Association here? They said, oh yeah, those 2 tables over there. And I go over to this table, one table, all elderly, and I said, are you some of the original members of the Montgomery? Yes, we were organized. So I see this one lady, and I go up to her, and I kneel down next to her. And she said, oh son, don't tell me on the floor. Come and sit there. No, I'm just standing for here. Let me ask you one question. Why did you do what you did for 381 days? At the end of the day, the only thing you were going to have is a different seat on the bus. Everything else in Montgomery was still racist and evil and wrong and segregated. The only thing different at the end of this was going to be a different seat on the bus. What kept you going? This lady grabs my hand and says to me, well, son, she said, first of all, as the boycott went on, and many of us worked in homes of white people, cleaning and babysitting, we had to walk back and forth to the white neighborhoods because all of us couldn't get the Jiffy rides, and all of us didn't have a way to get there, and we would walk back and forth. And I had a home I had to walk back and forth for every day. And the man of the home I was in so was hateful about the boycott and what was going on, because it was affecting the finances of the city, that he would make me stay late at night till it got dark to come home. Because a lot of the teenagers would drive cars while we were walking home at night and threaten us and call us names and say, we're going to kill you. We're not going to get home tonight. We're going to kill you tonight. And we're going to burn down your house, and threaten us to try to get us to break the boycott. She said, so I went through this constantly being afraid coming home. And she said, then I came home and my feet were so swollen at night. I sat in a chair and had to soak my feet in a pan to get the swelling down during the night while I slept. So in the morning I could put my shoes back on to walk to that house. I said, what kept you going? She looked at me and she said, what kept me going? She said, my faith. She said, secondly, because it was just the right thing to do. Today we want a grant, we want an accolade, we want a position, we want some money. What the hell ever happened to just doing stuff because it's right? Just fight because it's right. And recognize if I get anything out of it all, and nothing else, at least I can do it myself and look in the mirror and not be ashamed of who I am. And what's that there? Yes, sir.
I want to thank you for your speech. And,
You what?
for your speech that you just did.
Mhm.
I have a quick question. How being an activist like you, Martin Luther King, changed your experience from being like a reverend? How did it change?
Well, I think you can't really, gospel-wise, be a reverend and not be an activist. I mean, Jesus was radical. You know? And who was Jesus most called out? Church. He called the Pharisees and the Sadducees vipers and hypocrites. Nobody else in Jesus' life did he call out more than the church people. He turned over tables in the temple. 90% of all he did was not in a church, it was in the street. So